Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of your weekly dose of Terraform. My name is Anton Babenko, and well, today I'm a bit too excited than usually when I'm writing just Terraform code because I'm gonna to work on Terraform Provider. It's not the most straightforward thing for me. Well, it was not straightforward thing for me to work for many years, but then I discovered Speakeasy, Speakeasy, and kind of looked into it and figured out that it's actually quite easy and quite cool. I'm gonna to show you how to generate Terraform provider for OpenAI. Again, OpenAI is pretty much everywhere, so what can possibly go wrong if we let Terraform to generate images for us, for example. So without further delay, let's go to the browser. And as always, if you have any questions or if something is not clear, please write a question inside of chat. I know that it may be some delay between your question and, well, when you ask and when I actually see it, but I will do my best. Also, we will have one of employee founding engineer joining me in like 5 minutes. So if there are any questions which I'm not able to answer, Thomas will be able to answer it, I'm pretty sure. Hello, Umka. And yeah, let's get going. Let's see, where is this view? Fantastic. So the way I'm running these live streams is pretty much with the support from sponsors. So if you like what I'm doing, please go to github.com, and then my username is Anton Babenko. I have been active in the Terraform field since 2015. Yeah, it's actually quite a long time, I know. Maybe I need to switch to something else, I don't know. But yeah, Terraform AWS modules, serverless TF, a few other projects, Terraform best practices, as well as a bunch of newsletter like weekly TF, Terraform weekly newsletter, which I send every Wednesday, as well as this YouTube channel and many other activities which I'm doing pretty much for the whole period. So if you want to support me, don't hesitate, go to my GitHub sponsors and find tier which you think is the best for you. Okay, so enough about myself. So Speakeasy. Well, Speakeasy is a company which started with the idea that they will generate a bunch of different SDK and support different languages. I'm pretty sure that this idea is not new, and you may have discovered similar companies or similar solutions in the past where you have SDK generated in different languages like Go, Python, TypeScript, and so on. But what's actually new and why I'm talking about this company here on my Terraform weekly live stream is because they are able to generate it for Terraform as well. And that's exactly what I'm going to show. So if you go to Speakeasy API.dev, you can click try it now. You can open account. That's exactly what I did already. And yeah, and here you are. So once I open an account and I provided my email, I don't need to specify any credit card detail, which is pretty cool. So I'm able to click SDK and create new pipeline. So what Speakeasy is actually doing, if we look into probably somewhere here, we can understand the flow quite straightforward. So that we can run, we can use Speakeasy and feed our Open API specification file, and then Speakeasy will be doing the heavy lifting for us. So the way I will probably show it quite simple way here. So if I go to this API and I click new SDK pipeline and I specify name for it, let's say Open AI 2, just because I already have OpenAI, and version, let's say 1.0.0, it's not critical. And I specify my YAML file, which is this OpenAI YAML file. And by the way, this OpenAI YAML file is not maintained by me. It's maintained by OpenAI itself. They have it in the wild, so people can use it to figure out how the API is built. Okay, so I've specified this file here. I click continue, and that's pretty much it. That's all what I need to do to get it started. So I specified where I wanted to have hosted, and there are two ways how I can do it. So if I want, I can put it into Speakeasy account, or I can self-manage it in my own repository. So I can specify it for single language, and language here is Terraform. It says not configured because I need to specify where to push this. Like I need to specify my GitHub URL, which will be used by Speakeasy to provision the rest of things. And what is actually the rest of things? I have already clicked this way and I click Start Generating. So once I click Start Generating, then I will have this view. That's exactly what I did already. So OpenAI here is running every 24 hours. And as you can see, it's pushing everything, like new revisions every day, into my GitHub repository. And it's trying to regenerate provider for me. So how it's made here, if I look into this repository, which is connected to Speakeasy, there is one GitHub action, as you can see, which is running on schedule. So first it validates that my schema is valid, and then it just generates a bunch of SDKs. I don't need any other SDKs, I just need the one which is for Terraform. And it takes 42 seconds to do the magic. So what I can do normally is that I can provide my Open API file connected to the pipeline, and as soon as I change something in the Open API spec file, next day or next run, it will be updated. Of course, I can run it manually. I can run it every 5 minutes if I want. But the cool part here is that I can use GitHub Action for that, and this is already part of Speakeasy. That's fine. But for this demo and for today, I'm gonna to run this code myself locally because I want to show how we can do this using CLI. So Speakeasy also comes with a CLI, and that's pretty much what I will be using it. So once I upload my Open API spec, then I integrate Speakeasy server side, and and I can follow here this section, manage Terraform Providers. So because that's pretty much what I want to be doing. And today I'm going to focus on creation your Terraform providers. The documentation is pretty good and pretty easy to follow. I didn't have any issues following the documentation. But I want to say that the whole process of dealing with Terraform providers in Speakeasy is pretty new. So if you, for some reason, discover some bugs or some limitations, don't hesitate to reach out to people on Slack. There is a link to Slack somewhere, probably this one on the top. So open account, register there, and and here you are. Okay, so first question from Umka, does it work only with GitHub? And this is such a great question which I'm not able to answer myself without help from Thomas. So let me introduce Thomas. Let's see, the hardest part here is to figure out which button to click, as always. Maybe this one. Yeah. Hello, Thomas. Thomas is founding engineer at Speakeasy, and he will be the best person to answer any questions you guys have. So the first question, does it work only with GitHub?
So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, Anton. So for a Terraform provider, yes, it only works with GitHub, because to get it onto the Terraform registry involves setting up links between the Terraform registry and GitHub. And to my understanding, it's pretty much just GitHub supported. In terms of pretty much every other target that we provide, and actually the code generated, really we just generate it to a folder. And so that doesn't actually have any reliance on Git at all. So that can be deep inside some internal version system. It can be pretty much anything.
Right.
And similarly, it could be pushed to GitLab or an equivalent.
Yeah, which is actually a quite funny observation. I didn't think about this for quite some time. Is that there are other VCS out there, but Terraform registry works only with GitHub, which is a bit strange, but okay. Yeah, that's how it is. Okay, so let's move on to the real part. Okay, so, and I also want to say that following documentation was pretty straightforward process. If you read it, I mean, you may think that, oh my God, it's a lot of code, a lot of things to do. But also, if you know how Terraform works, it will help you to understand that Terraform works by calling APIs for you. And all you need to do is just to, inside of your Open API specification file, you pretty much need to add a couple things. One is that you need to map entity operation, which is pet create, like in this case, pet is an entity. And then you need to specify which part of your Open API specification is actually an entity. So adding these two lines, one line here and one line there, will do the magic. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so let's go to some fun part. As I showed already, I can do initial part here, and I can leave it like this. I mean, every night it will generate new provider for me. I can make a GitHub action which will be pushing all these new changes to Terraform registry as well. It's very straightforward process because it doesn't do anything else than just changing files in the folder. Okay, so let's look into the actual code, like all of this code which is in this repository. I have already checked out locally. Let me see where this button, and yeah, right, okay, cool. I have managed to add Thomas from a little bit wrong side, but well, that's life. We still can see you, Thomas. Okay, so if I go to the code, and that's where the fun part, really the funniest part here. So we need to look into this Terraform Provider Open AI location. I will make it a little bit bigger. All of these folders here were generated by Speakeasy on the first run. So all I did, I provided this YAML file, and I got a bunch of different folders and files back to me. As you can see, there is already a Terraform registry manifest file, which will help Terraform registry to discover that, hey, this is something what we can treat as a provider. And let's look into the content of this OpenAI file. So as I said earlier, OpenAI spec or OpenAI API specification file is something managed by openai.com So I have absolutely zero influence on what they did and how they did it. And I also want to make very, very big kind of disclaimer or kind of comment that it's very hard to find good Open API file out there in the wild. For example, I looked into several files which were, I think, provided by Zoom, because I wanted to manage my Zoom meetings and Zoom things through Terraform. I found Open API file, then I ran it through the validation, and there were so many errors, like not even warnings, but errors. And I ran it through different validations. So it means that even if you find Open API file and you put it into Speakeasy and then it doesn't work, it's not because Speakeasy is bad. It's probably because the schema file itself is totally off. And yeah, I tried 2-3 different Open API files which I found on GitHub, and only one which works without any questions was Open AI. And I think it's also quite cool. So the thing which you have this OpenAI YAML file, all you need to do is pretty much two things. First, you need to make sure that this file contains annotations required to specify certain entity operations. So you need to add this thing. Before adding this one, I want to just run these commands. So what this command does, Speakeasy generate SDK for language Terraform, output into the current location, and this is a schema path. Speakeasy is available through Brew or through other sources, and it's the easiest way to interact with Speakeasy in command line, because you can iterate quite fast. If you're happy with the way it works, then you can leave GitHub action, do the magic, and it will update it as frequently as possible, as needed. So if I run Speakeasy generate, as you can see, this file is exactly the same way as I got it. So there are no annotations yet. And Speakeasy goes through the validation, and it finds a lot of warning. Most of these warnings are easy to fix because, well, you just need to update something in the schema. But again, if you are not managing the schema yourself, then you need to contact Open API somehow or Open AI and tell them, hey guys, there are some issues, please fix it. Of course, you can do YAML surgery yourself and change anything you want. For this one, I don't do any changes, and as you can see, as the last line, it says collected 0 resources, collected 0 data sources. So let's add some annotations here. For example, we can add chat completions, and to do that, you just need to add this line. And let's see what else. And we can add this one. So there is chat completion and just completion. And also there is image generation. So there is images generation path. I also need to uncomment this line to make sure that I'm able to create images from Terraform. And I also need to do another thing to specify which of these components are actually entities inside of Speakeasy. So I do the same for completion, for chat completion. And as you can see, this magic is pretty complicated. And I'm really glad that I don't have to touch it and change it and do pretty much anything here. Because that's the whole point, right? You take something what is managed by the owner, by OpenAI, and you just add a couple things here yourself. If I was also thinking this, if I would like to have some sort of like automatic updates. How can I do this? So maybe that's a question to Thomas. What are the strategies of merging existing open API files, which are managed by independent companies like OpenAI, with annotations like this one? So let's say if I fetch this OpenAI tomorrow and OpenAI decided to add new things, are there automated ways to discover new things which can be suggested as resources or data sources? Do you know anything about it, or should it be a totally manual process every time user get it? User should read it through.
Sure. So I think there's two answers to that question. So I guess answer number one is when an upstream Open API spec changes, what we can do, and it kind of varies under some of the circumstances, but we can merge in changes because the path to, for instance, this create image request is constant, and so we can apply a delta, almost like a git diff, and merge it in. This is something we're actively working on improving the workflow for. Right now, it's a little bit manual, and we're trying to fully automate it. But the idea is, and you might have seen in our UI, there was a remote URL that you can pass in. Conceptually, what we're trying to get to is you put in a URL, then you put in some changes on top of that URL, and whenever what Speakeasy does behind the scenes is it polls the URL, works out when there's a change, merges in all the manual stuff, these annotations onto it, and then goes to generate it. But I'll say that kind of workflow is still in progress. We haven't really gotten the DX of that right yet. But the second thing is we actually use language models themselves to do these annotations and to do these validation fixes automatically. So there is a Speakeasy suggest CLI command, and we also have that through GitHub Actions. And what that means is when we go to generate this in the first place, it would try and automatically fix these documents as we are going through them. So yeah, Speakeasy suggest, and that uses OpenAI GPT-4 to try and make automatic fixes and to try and at some point in the future do all these annotations automatically.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah,
and I will very much caveat that this is beta, and I am taunting the demo god by asking you to do this live.
No problem.
But
No problem.
I can share some links afterwards if you're kind of curious in our LLM stuff.
No, I understand that it's in progress, so I'm not really surprised that something is not working. So we have still plenty of things to focus and to show. So let's move on for now. Okay, there was a comment. Where was this comment? Here is it by Umka, new models list, etc. I guess this was a kind of comment related to new information being added. So if OpenAI decide to add new model somewhere here, so all I need to do is I need to rerun Speakeasy, and Speakeasy will figure out that okay, something is changed, and it will automatically update it. I guess that's that's pretty much thing. But if you decide to add new resource, then at some point you will need to add annotations like I did. Where is it? Like this one, Speakeasy annotations. There are not many annotations available, so it's not really a lot of work to figure out what you need to do. In fact, you just need to hint Speakeasy to tell that, hey, this is resource endpoint, and this is how to talk to this resource, and this is entity which you need to serialize back and forth. Not really rocket science, I would say. But okay, so now I have added these annotations, and what I can do now is that if I run this code again, I should be able to see that now Speakeasy collected 3 resources: chat completion resource, and image resource. And there are 0 data sources in this case because I did not use this operation. So here it says create. If it is create, update, and delete, then it is part of resource lifecycle. If it would be just get, then it is data source. So then Speakeasy would figure out that, okay, this is actually going to be data source, and it would generate code for data source. In terms of OpenAI, there are not many data sources as such. There are just a lot of resources. You will understand. You will understand it if you use OpenAI or ChatGPT. So, okay, now I have generated this thing, and what exactly I have achieved by doing this. So the cool part here is that inside of Terraform Provider OpenAI repository, there is a folder called examples. And these examples were automatically generated by Speakeasy. There are some configuration, what I need to write, and there are also resources. So all of these resources will automatically generated, so we can understand what kind of prompt, what kind of arguments we need to specify. That's it. And for all of these things, this is automatically updated, which is pretty cool, right? But does it even work, right? I mean, isn't it cool to just not see these resources, but actually try them? And I think the best way to try this is to just run this, and this is well documented inside of usage, where it says testing the provider locally. I need to specify. I need to specify go run main go, and that's exactly what I do. So it says provider started, and now I need to hint my Terraform to reattach providers instead of using the official Terraform registry provider, which is not even published yet. I want to point it to local network address. So here is how I do it. If I go to the place where I have this Terraform code already written for me, I have Terraform Provider blog. I specified how to authenticate with my OpenAI. I have manually created API key to be able to talk to OpenAI. This is documented on OpenAI side. And then I specified some resources, and that's pretty much it. So now I need to, as I said, I need to remap these providers. So I need to export this environment variable tf reattach providers, and from now on I can just run tinit, just to make sure. I need to run tinit. T is of course Terraform, and then I can run Terraform apply. Actually, I already have some state, so let me remove my state file. So if I run Terraform apply, it's so fast. I don't know why it's so fast, but okay. Right, probably didn't talk to the endpoint because there was no state, no need to do anything. And as you can see, it's trying to make absolutely native Terraform resources, nothing specific to Speakeasy or no limitations whatsoever. So it's going to create 3 resources: chat completion with some messages. I think it's it can be a bit tricky to figure out what kind of arguments you need to do here, or what kind of arguments are actually supported by all of this, right? I mean, how do I know that messages is supported? Maybe something else is supported. What is stop, for example? So if I don't need to run this now, of course. So I can just show you how things are shown. So if I run Terraform Provider schema JSON and I look at this schema in a nice way, this is internal representation of the Terraform Provider schema, the way Terraform knows about it, right? It's a bit hard to read if you want to understand, okay, what exactly I need to do, or what is choices and some other things, what is computed. Most of these things you don't actually need to know in order to use. But what you will appreciate is the following. If I go to my, where is my code? Somewhere here, yes, exactly. And I can generate documentation for this. Speakeasy comes with a pretty awesome way of generating documentation, which will be readable inside of Terraform registry. Again, it's just a go command to run, go generate, and exactly, oh my god, that's a perfect timing. Umka just asked, can Speakeasy generate documentation for your Terraform resources? That's exactly what I'm showing. Yes. Okay, so when I run go generate command, Speakeasy, or not Speakeasy in this case it's just go generate command was executed, and the content is inside of docs folder. So this content is exactly matching to the real resources which were generated by Speakeasy. So everything here is updated. Documentation, as you can see, it says API key and server URL. That's what I need to know, for example, when I connect to this provider. And then there is documentation for 3 resources. One is like image. As you can see, the documentation here is pretty awesome. You can customize many of these things, I believe. Is it true that I can customize, let's say, write more here or not, Thomas?
Yeah, so all of this comes from the Open API specification. So if you're building an API and you want that to be exposed via Terraform Provider, this is the description annotation, and it can be multi-line, it can be markdown, it can be whatever someone wants. But all we really do is we take it from the Open API specification and we push it into the Terraform type system through code generation. So yeah, it's fully user controllable.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And some of these cases contain links to Markdown and a lot of nice formatting. Again, it comes all from Open API spec file, and as you can see, it's pretty detailed if someone wants to read it. But as I showed earlier, examples already contain code. Already contain code somewhere here. Let me see. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so all this stuff is here. Yeah, using Terraform to interact with Open API is hilarious. I love it too. But how can we love it if we don't know that it's even working, right? Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it's all faked. No, actually, let's try it. Okay, so we have amazing documentation, which means that if we look into this documentation, we can figure out, for example, that prompt on this OpenAI image resource is required. It's a text description of the desired image, maximum 1000 characters. And okay, sounds good. So if we look into these resources, there are chat completion, and image. And if I look into prompt, for example, for image, here I specify that I want to have 2 images, and prompt, someone is having fun. Okay, let's see. Let's see what is the definition of fun for OpenAI, right? Let's see. So if I run Terraform apply and I say yes, it's pretty quick for everything, except, I mean, it's quick for OpenAI completion, for chat completion, and creation of images took 9 seconds. Well, that's because it's actually creating real images. If we look into this output, which was provided, image URLs is a list of 2 URLs. Let me show you what is the definition of. So this is a definition of someone is having fun by OpenAI. Well, not worst. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, I think OpenAI has different definition of fun, but it's okay. At least we have something. Oh my god. Yeah. So you can imagine what kind of stuff you can do by just specifying this one, and you have URLs here. For some reason, I don't know why, this URL is not gonna to live forever. So you need to do something about it. Like after you create it here, then you have this URL. You probably need to store it in your S3 bucket yourself somehow. Yeah, I just discovered it recently when I was running it, but in general, that's not related to Speakeasy. Okay, so what else can we look here? Chat completion. It says Speakeasy EC2. Let's look into what kind of request was this one. So the chat completion was, give me a good name for EC2 instance. Company name is Speakeasy. Respond in a single word. And this is going straight into a Terraform apply without further input. Okay, let's see. Yeah, if I specified this somehow differently, give me a good name for EC2 instance, company name Speakeasy. What else can I parameterize it? Okay, let's say make it let's say 8 chars long. Let's say 8 characters long. No, 8. Speakeasy itself is longer, so let's say 12 characters long. Okay, so if I run this code now, it will understand that message has changed, and it's gonna to do some. It cannot change it in place because it needs to destroy previous resource, and it creates new one. That sounds perfect to me. And the output is a RAM runner. Yeah, right, exactly 12 characters. Cool. So it looks like this call to chat completion worked. Of course, I can play infinitely with different other inputs here, but I think it's amazing, honestly. It's like you figure out something to write here, which model to use, and in 1 second you have something you wanted. Same with the second request or second prompt completion. A poetic song about a bumblebee that likes to code. His name is Busy. And I guess this completion, or let's look into documentation just for fun. Why it is so small? I couldn't figure out. As you can see, it's a lot of different inputs. So for people who are not experts in all of this, it's a bit hard to figure out what to write. So max tokens, maybe that's what we need to specify. Max tokens 16. Should I specify max tokens to something more? Let's see. Just because the result of this is a bit too short. Max tokens, let's say 1,000. Again, Terraform plan or Terraform apply is extremely quick because well, it doesn't talk unless it's necessary. Yeah, and here we are. So we have a completion for pretty long song. You don't want me to sing this song, but I see that it's a lot of CSS and a lot of coders art mentioned. So yeah, algorithms solve a problem. Amazing. So that was pretty much the whole purpose of it. So we wrote some inputs and we get some outputs. As always with Terraform, we can look into Terraform state and understand what exactly was happening here, like what exactly is available. Maybe some other outputs are more relevant for us, but I think that's awesome. Okay, let's look. There were a few questions from people. Let's say Umka is asking, if I have self-hosted automation inside a cloud, non-public, it exposes API via private API, and I want to make custom Terraform provider. Right. So how can I use Speakeasy for it? I guess the question is in general how to talk to something private, how to make or how to add support for authentication in my provider, right? Because well, we are not always talking to something very public. Thomas, do you have any suggestions where to look for something what is on the private?
Yeah, so I think there are two answers to this question. Answer number one is the Terraform provider is just code, right? And it communicates via HTTP calls with a API server. And if that API server is hidden behind a file that's completely private, but you're running the Terraform apply within the VPC or within some non-private network, it's just going to work. No changes needed. It's just about where you're running the Terraform apply. But then the second question is, you usually wouldn't make a public Terraform provider for a private API. It doesn't really make sense to expose that to the community. In which case, at the end of the day, Speakeasy generates code. This can be pushed to a private Terraform registry to kind of make it accessible. Or it could even, there's a few ways when you're using Terraform to not even have something live on the registry in the first place. Because you can use a dev override on the client machine to point like a locally version of Terraform running with a provider code just directly against some target. So yeah, there's absolutely no issue whatsoever getting some self-hosted private API working with a Speakeasy Terraform provider. There's no real difference apart from the client machine.
Right, that's because Speakeasy is not gonna to connect to this endpoint at any point of time itself, right? It's not gonna to. There is no need to connect Speakeasy backend with this system itself. It's only customer who's gonna to connect.
Correct, 100%. So, I mean, the code that we generate is all open source. It becomes, I think, usually MIT licensed. That depends on the customer. It's very easy to scan through it and just have a look, but all it's doing is communicating with a private API. There's no extra HTTP calls. It's not, you're not going outside the barrier of a communication between the client machine and the server URL. And the server URL is usually by default configurable as well. So you could have, for instance, like a public API and a separate private API, and you'd want to maybe test out a change using your private API. That all works fine out of the box.
Mm. And there is also a kind of clarification. It would be nice to see some tutorial on this.
So I briefly answered that as well. We have documentation on our site. Unfortunately, it's been written by me and therefore isn't as a developer, I personally think that the documentation I create is probably hard to follow. But if you're happy to listen to me, there's a few videos on this page which effectively walk through this process step by step,
Yeah.
and I try and break out the value and all the things needed to do. And we also have a public Slack. So if you're having difficulty following this, or have improvements to the documentation that you think we could do, would love to hear about them on our public Slack, because as a developer, I personally think I am awful at writing documentation and tutorials, but I've tried my hardest. So yeah.
Well, I personally have seen much worse, so you're pretty good here. So it's totally good. I mean, it's easy to follow documentation. You covered most of things which people need. So maybe some more like end-to-end examples, or as Umka is saying, like specific cases, like how to make provider or like FAQ type of scenarios, because this is pretty much frequently asked question, I would suppose. Yeah, but in general, it's very good starting point. We'll talk more about like roadmap and what's the plan for this a bit later. Let's continue with one more question by LinkedIn user. I don't see the name, so sorry. The doc generation is a great quality of life feature. There have been many times I wanted to try a provider on the registry and there is no documentation with it, so I moved on to something else. And this is a reality pretty much for many open source projects out there, because usually developers just say like, okay, it's just for me. If you are brave enough, you can try it, look into the code and figure out how things were written. But of course, you don't want to be the first guy to try it out and then discover that it doesn't work at all. So yeah, documentation is pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with the way Speakeasy generated documentation for my case here. Okay, so what else can we do here with this code? So I updated this OpenAI. I specified something here. I run my amazing example. I did a couple changes here, and I got everything what I wanted, right? So far, it was working like without any issues. So let's look into something what I have not been doing. And honestly, between you and me, or between all of us, I don't think it is even possible to do with Speakeasy. So correct me if I'm wrong, but there are situations where I want to have, let's say, some extra things added into this provider. So for example, yes, there are a lot of different endpoints, a lot of different paths covered in this Open API. But what if I want to extend this API and, let's say, add one extra resource, for example, or do something extra. So for example, currently my image generation is returning me a URL, but what if I want to copy this URL? What if I want to do something extra with it? I would expect, like from the user perspective, I would expect to have, let's say, another resource, which is something like image, I don't know, copy, for example. And this is going to be my copy, something like this. And then here, I want to specify, let's say, source URL. This is just me thinking about it. And I want to say that I want to copy from this URL, I don't know, into destination URL, I don't know, something here. So as you can see, this is an extra resource or extra thing, which is not part of Open AI specification as such. So the question is, how can I extend this provider to have this coverage? Are there ways to support multiple schema files at the same time or merge them at once? This is a question to Thomas.
So, yeah. So I mean, in my mind, the magic of Terraform, and I guess the reason why everyone pretty much uses infrastructure as code today, is it is very trivial to grab a random community provider and chuck it into your Terraform config. And so what Speakeasy is trying to do is it's trying to expose APIs for a spec. And that spec could have multiple servers in it. It could have, there's a ton of different config options we could go into about, can you merge two specs together? Yeah, we've got a command for that, but slightly out of scope. That, but if you were to try and make, for instance, like an image copy thing, at the end of the day, you'd be, let's say if you're pushing it to S3, you'd be hoping that S3 would have input server URL type option. And then you would be able to take the URL produced by OpenAI image and then push it into S3. But that probably doesn't exist. And so the onus is somewhat on the user to go find a provider which does that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I sort of bet that somebody's built one of these little things. Given one URL, try and do a get on that URL and a post to another, and then just grab the provider from the registry and chuck it in. It wouldn't really be possible just from Speakeasy, though. Speakeasy is just one component that goes into like a company's DevOps, infrastructure as code segment.
Yeah, so talking about S3 specifically, of course, there is a way to do this. And in some cases, let's say Lambda. No, there is no Lambda. Yeah, and in most cases, it's already implemented inside of provider. I was also wondering in regards to adding extra functionality, what are the strategies to extend existing provider? Let's say I want to have, let's say I want to create something, I don't know, something what is not inside of this provider. So, for example, I want to make, let's say, I want to create this image, but I also want to be able to get, I don't know, MD5 from this image, for example. I would expect that there has to be a new endpoint from this one, which will take URL as an input, download it, and get MD5, for example. Or most frequently, or well, not most frequently, at least in my world, I would like to have, let's say, that's where I actually was very excited about at the very beginning when I looked at Speakeasy, is that there is Terraform AWS Lambda module where the logic of making an archive is pretty complicated. And currently it's written in Python and it's a lot of code, a lot of magic here. What I would like to have is that I would like to have Terraform Provider, which will contain only one resource, which will say archive, for example. It will accept a lot of inputs, but I would like Speakeasy, like initially, I was thinking that Speakeasy can generate not just code from the specification, but can allow me to have some sort of hatches where I can say, use this as an, let's say, for everything, but inside of the generated create method, allow me to put pieces of my Go code somewhere. So if I look into the produce code here, let's say provider image resource, something like this, right? All of this was generated quite naturally, no questions about it. some of this is not implemented because I did not specify methods for that, which is, I didn't specify annotations for that, which is fine. But in some cases, if I look into I don't know which one, maybe this one. I don't even know where it can be, but I was expecting that there are some places, or actually it's quite often inside of validation. So for example, if I want to specify that there is some validation, it may be not even possible to express it, or maybe not exposed inside of Open API spec. If I look into, for example, Terraform AWS Provider, because at the end of the day, we all want it. Like, let's be honest, we all want that Terraform AWS Provider is generated from single source, right? But if we look into internal service, and if we look into this guy, this piece of code is slightly different from the one which was generated by Speakeasy, and in many cases it is because they are using some sort of validate function which is not expressed in Open API. Of course, I understand that AWS is not using Open API, at least publicly. Maybe they use it for something else, like internally, or they use Swifty. What's the name of it? But my question was mostly about: are there ways to hook or to add different hooks and to specify, let's say, diff suppress function?
So yes, there are. So it's right now all that kind of customization goes into the Open API spec because we want to have like a single document which is generating almost everything. So for instance, for diff suppression, we have annotation which, when added, would suppress any diffs in a similar way to. So it's complicated to describe what diff suppression does in a few words, but effectively propagating state from prior plan into propagating plan state into state, and in doing so, then what the API does is then it no longer actually says computed when will be known after apply. It's the diff is suppressed. And so for a user to, for instance, do that, we have like this x-speakeasy Terraform diff suppress. I think it's on our extensions page, so we can pull it up, and then that adds it in. That's slightly different to what you're describing, which is like, how do we stick code in here? What some people do is they monkey patch it, and so you can effectively say, let's use Speakeasy to generate our initial version. Okay, that's good enough, but we want to do some extra stuff. And then they pretty much just edit the file, and we don't override it anymore. Every time you monkey patch or you want to do stuff on top, it kind of sucks because now you're maintaining the monkey patch forever, but it can be done. And then for things like validations, so Open API specs allow you to do validations. Some really obvious ones are things like enums. So if we were to look at like some of the resources we generated, you will see validations for the enums in here, where we say, okay, right, I think model, for instance, is an enum, where we say, okay, right, it can only be like GPT-4, GPT 3.5, etc. And then I think you have to search for validators. I'm not sure it's an image resource or if it's in the other one.
Probably.
But the idea is that a user shouldn't need to write them. They'll be in the Open API spec.
Yeah, right. But as you said, monkey patching is an option. But what is actually the flow? Like, as soon as people start monkey patching, this means that they don't need Speakeasy at all after that, right?
I mean, yeah, pretty much. The code that Speakeasy generated could be ejected immediately. the selling point and why we're trying to do this as a commercial project is that I think a lot of people don't want to even think about their Terraform provider.
Mm.
If you're a company and you're building an API product, a Terraform provider is quite complicated and quite expensive to build and maintain. So the idea that Speakeasy is behind is it's much simpler if developers just write code, and then there's all sorts of clever stuff that'll take code and make Open API specs, and then we go from the Open API spec to the Terraform provider and to the other SDKs, and so it's whilst it is possible to eject, we're hoping that most people would prefer just to not maintain this, and we effectively maintain it for users.
Yeah, right. And then a more like a realistic question: what kind of complexity of the like real life providers do you anticipate people to deal with? I mean, AWS provider is one of the oldest, full of exceptions, full of complicated logic, which is pretty hard to follow and generalize. Even if you would have some sort of open API or alternative provided by AWS, which you can put here, I don't think it would be even possible to express all of this if and exceptions and edge cases, because they quite often say like, oh, this has changed in this version, so this is deprecated, and all of this things are pretty pretty different, I would say. So do you expect people to use Speakeasy to generate 100% using what is provided in Open API spec, or do you actually expect customers to provide, as you said, specification, get 90% done, and then monkey patch the rest, like in the real world?
So I think using the Terraform provider AWS as an example, maybe it's a really good one because it's hacks everywhere. Where AWS have gone and built a fantastic API to do everything you want on the cloud, and now they've exposed that API through Terraform. And I kind of think when a company grows organically an API like that, it's not designed to be worked with Terraform. They've just built an API and then they've gone and called it with Terraform. So what we expect and what we've seen is that we absolutely can support complicated APIs, but it relies on companies, rather than putting hacks into their Open API spec, to kind of improve their API to handle things better. And so a good company, and not sure we all love GCP, but the GCP Terraform provider is fully generated. They've built their own internal stack to do everything called Magic Modules. And it's kind of completely impossible for you to take Magic Modules and apply it to your own company. It's full of GCP mannerisms. It's effectively really hard to do. But the fact that GCP have managed to build a Terraform provider completely automatically implies that this dream of like, oh, we don't have to worry about a Terraform provider, we'll just generate it, can work, but as long as you're okay to make changes to your API to make the semantics of your Terraform provider a bit better. It's sort of like if you're a web developer, you could do all sorts of form validations on the client, but then if you do that and you don't check them on the server, you might end up with bad data in the server. And so generally the argumentation that we are pushing is update your servers, make your servers work really well with Terraform, and then actually everyone's going to have a way better experience, and you won't need to put hacks everywhere inside your Terraform provider like the AWS one does.
Oh, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that if, let's say, hypothetically, AWS comes up with Open API specification, which is valid, and you run it through Speakeasy, will Speakeasy be able to generate absolutely working code, or still there are some exceptions or some missing functionality in Speakeasy in order to process Open API specification correctly.
There is no reason that if AWS made an Open API spec that we couldn't import it into Speakeasy and generate it. But the semantics for how you would call things vary. And so, for instance, let's say to create a certificate inside AWS, because you've got it open, it might involve making more than one API request. You might have to make an API request to create a certificate, make another one to validate the certificate, make them repeatedly to check if it's validated before you say, okay, I've created this and it works. And so the act of making that behavior so through Speakeasy would generally be, let's make an API request that creates a certificate and validates and does all that in one request. And then let's say we set up, because we have all sorts of polling logic, which we can introduce. Whenever it returns like a HTTP status code that says it's not ready, like 404 continuously, we're just going to retry for like 10 minutes on 30-second intervals. If they configured that in their Open API spec, it would work. But that would actually require an API change to AWS. So this kind of works when you're the guy controlling the API, and you can update your API to make it work, or you're very lucky to be working with a company who's actually done a pretty good job at making a CRUD-like API, which would just be directly exposed with Terraform.
Yeah, and I cannot imagine AWS to do that, really, because it's just, as you said, it's already more than, how much, 15 years old. So yeah, it's unlikely that they can standardize things so much. What about Open API versus other? Like I just remember that AWS is using Smithy.
Yep.
And why Open API and not Smithy? Because I have not seen Speakeasy considering using Smithy protocol as input.
Yeah, so the journey of why we picked Open API over a bunch of alternatives is a long journey, and it is, but effectively we chose it because we're trying to build a commercially supported product as a startup. And Smithy is great. You get to define services rather than API calls, and so in theory that could make a really minimal effort to turn a Smithy spec into a Terraform provider. And actually, AWS have built all this stuff with CloudFormation, right? But it turns out that inside AWS, not everyone uses Smithy anyway. So you've got various sub-teams in AWS, not all of whom use it, some of whom use Open API specs. And outside the AWS world, I have seen very, very few companies use Smithy. And so this is a very pragmatic answer for why we didn't use Smithy, or actually build our own format to do this, because we just want to sell this. We want to get it in front of as many people as possible and make it useful to them with very minimal effort. And if we'd ask people to, okay, you've got an Open API spec, just rewrite it in Smithy, and then you can make a Terraform provider, that would be too hard an ask. Whereas what we instead do is, if you've already got an Open API spec, very minimal, like 6 lines of code, and boom, you've got a Terraform provider. And so it's kind of pragmatic in how do we just minimize the effort to make Speakeasy usable by large numbers of companies.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, from business point of view, of course, it makes perfect sense. But I was also wondering, what kind of customers are you looking for? Like, is it AWS size of companies, or is it really a company, as you mentioned earlier, it's hard to maintain Terraform Provider and it's expensive, and well, then logical choice sounds like make it easier and cheaper for people who can write one YAML file, put it here, and every night you have Terraform Provider, something like this.
So, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, which is, I guess, slightly independent from the technical side of this. We want to support everyone from really small companies with like maybe 3 Terraform resources to companies with a massive API service with like 500. And in production right now, for instance, we have Airbyte, who have about 250 resources and about 250 data sources. They're an ETL provider, and they've got like a massive set of kind of resources to map to all the different input sources to their pipeline and output sources that they do. And they obviously sell this as a cloud service, and it's really, really big. Because they've generated their Open API spec from their code, from the Airbyte point of view, it was a few weeks of effort. Basically, have an engineer go build a bit of logic to add these Speakeasy annotations into their existing Open API spec generator, and then they stand back. We made the rest happen, and now they're live. So that's really big. And then we've got a bunch of actually really quite small Terraform providers out there. I mean, we've just made OpenAI with free resources. We have quite a few companies who almost have 2 resources in a provider, but just making those 2 resources accessible in Terraform is massively useful for whatever internal use case they have. It could be as simple as like a data source to just expose some internal information, like a business unit or a price point or whatever things, and then chuck that into a tag on an AWS resource. By just like having a tiny provider, it means that they don't need to learn how to build a Terraform provider. They don't need to go find a bunch of Go engineers. They just need to basically give us a spec, job done. Don't think about it too much.
Yeah, well, Airbyte is definitely a good example of how things can be generated. I guess if I go to the registry, I don't know where is the registry link, but I would expect to see a lot of high quality content there if I go to this to search information about this registry. Where is registry? Terraform registry. This one. Yeah, as we talked earlier about documentation being generated is very big bonus. Really cool. Cool. Right, so let's see how it goes for generation of something bigger, maybe next time. Today we looked into how to add pretty much just 6 lines of code, 2 per individual resource, and we have everything generated for us. I like it myself very much. So my kind of open question still is that in reality, not everything is available inside of Open API spec right away. And while I have something present there already, I want to extend, I want to grow this in 2 places. I want to be able to add my customization inside of generated Terraform provider code. Unfortunately, I don't think I was able to express what kind of customization I am thinking about myself, just my personal issues. But as you say, if Open API YAML file is containing this information, then it will eventually end up into generated Go code. Some things like, for example, using environment variables for API key. Can I do this now?
So yeah, you totally can. Though you'll need to use the Terraform. I think you use like tf_var_API_key. There's like a standard way of getting one of these in. Like we could generate code which says load in OpenAI_key generically from the environment. We actually don't like to do that as a provider, I think, because it's really weird when you're running a provider and it's running code on your device. So we actually like to leave the code that we're generating really simple, and say you should use the tf_var environment variable to send it in.
That's the difference. That using tf_var means that I need to declare this already quite explicitly. So that's what I did here. I added this OAI API key and then I use it here. But instead, what I wanted to have, and this is actually supported by Open AI Provider, if I look into the schema, in the description they said Oh, just specify Open AI API key. Here it says. So I was expecting that I can just specify, as you can see here in Perl, it's expecting this OpenAI API key. And I was expecting that my Terraform code would also somehow figure out that in order to talk to this provider, it needs to have not this variable. Because currently that's what I do. I mean, this input is sensitive and it is sourced as tfvar underscore API, no, OAI API key. This is what I do right now. But instead, I wanted to use this environment variable.
So yeah, unfortunately not possible today. I think so. Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise are trying to push that all inputs to Terraform should pretty much be declared, so that these things will just work even if you're running this deep inside a big enterprise company and the actual apply is running somewhere else. I do think there is value in what you suggest in like maybe bringing in default values from environment variables. But to be honest, we haven't thought about it too much. Might do it at some point in the future.
Well, this is a standard practice for pretty much everything. I mean, all Terraform providers have this possibility. Yeah. Instead of using this one, just using this one. But okay, this is a small thing which is not really critical. And as you say, you just haven't been thinking about it, so that's fine. It's a small thing to add. I'm pretty sure you have enough things in the roadmap already. There is question, let me move it here. How is versioning handled? Is it from Open API as well? Oh yeah, that's a good question. Because in Open API we have, this is version of Open API file itself, right? And this is version of what? Of OpenAI API. And where is version of Terraform Provider?
So info.version is the version of the OpenAPI document itself. And so yeah, we take that version increment and then work out how to version the Terraform provider in the registry based off of that. I will also caveat that a lot of people don't bother to update that version. They just kind of update their API and it stays 2.0.0. I kind of bet that OpenAI are one of those companies who've just left this version the same forever. So actually, we have a bunch of logic to work out what's a breaking change, what's a minor feature, what's like a patch, because it's not going to actually affect the API signature, and do this independently of a version bump here. And so, yeah, we're trying to make this as easy as possible for developers so that they don't really think about it. They just make changes to the document. But by default, we take that info.version and we work out a semantic version delta. So if it was 3.0.0, that's a major version bump. So therefore, the Terraform should go for a major version bump too. In practice, it can be just ignored and we'll auto version everything. So,
but at which point of time will it actually happen? Like if I have GitHub Action running every night, then let's say the schema file is exactly the same always. It will look into this 200 and it will not do anything. But then if it decides that something has to be regenerated or something new happens, or Speakeasy suddenly became smarter and learn a little bit better code generated, which has happened in the past quite frequently, will it actually update this file for me? Or
so it won't update this file because often this file is like an upstream artifact. It might be living in like a public documentation URL. But what it will do is independently manage a version inside the Terraform provider itself. So I think if you look at, for instance, your GitHub repo, there's like a changelog file which we're automatically maintaining. And we'll look at the version there, look at the change, work out what version to apply. Most of the time, it's kind of picking up very minor stuff that's we're still pretty early stage, so the generator's changing a little bit in that version. But yeah, so we're maintaining an independent version to the info version, but the version number increment that we do for the next version is dependent on the version number increment on the upstream artifact. So complicated answer. I'm not sure if I was perfectly understandable.
Well, I think it will be easier if we just try it for real, and then we will see which version is updated where. I can see that in change logs in releases MD that from time to time there are new version of Speakeasy CLI, and it says that based on Open API doc, which has not changed, it's always 2.0, but Speakeasy CLI did change. That's why new version was released. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll caveat. This is maintained through the GitHub action itself rather than the CLI command. So the CLI command ensures that, let's say, the internal, the example, the docs folder are up to date given the Open API spec. But the CLI, the GitHub action itself knows a bit more than just the current state of things. It knows the previous state of things. And that's the thing that looks at the change log. So to run through a full example of that, we'd actually have to run through the GitHub action and rerun. There's a generate dispatch that we can call, and is also automatically called. And that's the thing which either makes a commit directly, or it's usually configured in a PR mode, and it'll make a PR on the underlying repo with the change.
Yeah, right. Well, sounds cool. Yeah, and as you said at the very beginning, that Speakeasy CLI does not care about your version control system, it just change file locally. So obviously it does not know anything about Git tags or new versions. It's just static thing generating whatever. And then the job of opening pull request and updating it correctly is different. Okay, yeah, sounds cool. Right. Let's talk about business side of Speakeasy just briefly. I'm not gonna to ask you for anything really sensitive, but Speakeasy CLI is an open source tool, right? Speakeasy CLI, which I'm using here to generate code. Here, this one, Speakeasy. I have installed it, I guess, through Brew. Let's see, Brew info Speakeasy. I'm just lazy to go to this URL. No, there is no URL. But okay, yeah, this URL. So yeah, from business point of view, what I wonder, so first of all, really congratulations that you managed to convince people that this is going to be a sustainable business, and they gave you some money, which is always cool to see. But how are you going to price this stuff? Like,
yeah, so as you have very much pointed out, startup, so pricing incredibly subject to change, and everything I state now may change at some point in the future. So yeah, as you've shown, the Speakeasy CLI is free, self-service. A user can basically sign up, try it out, make a local folder with a Terraform provider, and just kind of go with it. What we charge for is kind of the commercial support, and when these providers are in the registry, and we price like a monthly fee based on like the number of resources and data sources in the API. So, for instance, like an API, well, I say we price per resource, but it also has like an exponential decay as you get more and more resources. So if you have like 500 resources, you'll pay a lot less per resource than if you have 3 resources. Slightly complicated, but happy to go into details if anyone reaches out to us. But yeah, so if you have, for instance, like 3, 4, 5 resources, it's pretty cheap. So
Mm.
on a monthly figure that we charge per month, um, and yeah, we charge it maybe around 1,000 a month for a small commercially supported provider. But we also don't really want to turn any customers away at this point. So very, very happy to chat about it with companies if that's an issue.
Mm. Yeah, and as you mentioned already, well, it's actually one of the challenge for me to understand, even from business point of view. Why would I have to use it if my API is not changing so often? Let's say I add, I start using Speakeasy. I generated a bunch of things for myself, and that's it. Like what was Airbyte, I think. Yeah, Airbyte. You said uh, that they have a lot of resources. Everything is generated. But as soon as they don't add new integrations, new resources, they don't need to use Speakeasy, right? Why should I pay like monthly fee for what?
Yeah, so um, the monthly fee is really kind of for support and for changes, and it's I mean, so early stage right now, early stage businesses, you often act a little bit like a consultancy, and so we have Slack Connect channels with all of our customers. They tell us we're making this change. Can you make this happen? We get right onto it and we solve that for them. If you're a customer who doesn't chat with us very much, it's still often you're quite happy to pay a monthly fee just to make sure that if things change, if you want to add new APIs in, add more resources in, add more data sources, you kind of get that support pretty much forever as long as you pay that monthly fee.
Mm.
And if you decided to stop paying at some point and maintain it yourself, well, that's totally okay, but engineers are quite expensive. So,
Mm.
you obviously take a hit when you're supporting any artifact as a company. And we'd like to ensure that we can retain customers through just providing amazing service and making sure that, that they can trust us to just sort all this complexity out for them and not really think about it that much. I don't think
Mm.
we've lost a customer yet. Actually, we have 100% user retention.
Yeah, yeah.
So hopefully our great support is the magic that keeps people with us.
Mm. Yeah, this is for sure the case. And also, um, probably one of the last question which I have is related to the roadmap. Like currently you have, again, probably let's focus on roadmap just for Terraform. Because if I look here, of course, a bunch of different technologies being added, different programming languages. All of this is pretty much uh, forever. If I look into just Terraform, what kind of things do you think is like the easiest one, or like not easiest, but the most relevant for people, or the most impactful one?
So
Uh,
I think the most impactful is we're trying to make absolutely amazing documentation to a degree better than a lot of Terraform providers that are out in the world right now. And the way that we're doing that is we are trying to enrich an Open API spec. And by enrich, I mean like, let's say you have a very basic Open API spec, no examples, no description. We're using language models to effectively try and generate all these automatically.
mm,
And so a lot of our stuff in the early roadmap is about this language model integration to try and get this thing true, which is, if you're building and selling an API product, you don't really have to think about
mhm,
everything beyond just maintaining code. Ideally, you maintain your code. There is something that helps make an open API spec from whatever language technology you're using. Like if you're using fast API in Python, that's all automated. And then
mhm,
Speakeasy kind of enriches on top of that and would stick in really good examples, stick in really good descriptions, try and rewrite it to have it make as much sense as possible. And then the
mhm,
documentation that's in the Terraform registry, you don't have to think about it. It's all managed automatically.
mhm,
So I guess that's the main thing that we're working on is trying to make the experience, if you're building and selling an API, like as zero effort as possible, including documentation side of it.
Right.
And
Right.
then the second bit is you can define all sorts of runtime validations in the Open API specification. You can, for instance, put in like regular expressions for like string attributes, or like say this array must have at least one child.
Mm-hmm.
And so we currently don't support all of those. We support like enums and required and optional, but that's effectively it. And we support dates and date times as well, but those are relatively standard. And so the idea is that we'll support more runtime validations and try and make the Terraform providers have really good kind of experience in using them. Some are better than others. We want to try and make the best ones. And then, yeah, the last one is we really want our users to not have to worry about Open API specifications themselves. So we're trying to do stuff to help them manage it without having to have this burden of constantly maintaining this spec. And there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of things in that.
I
Yeah.
see. Well, that's pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, I think we are out of time and questions. If anyone has any questions, please let us know. Write it in chat. But I think, yeah, I'm out of questions for sure, because it looks just cool and I want to try more. But for now, yeah, I think we are done. Yeah, the very last thing, which is kind of bugging my mind still. What about end-to-end process? Like, are there features in Speakeasy? Maybe it is somewhere here, but I didn't find it yet. Where I can see the complete cycle, let's say from this view where I added this to publish it to the registry. As I understand, I still need to do quite a lot, right, when it comes to publishing this to the registry, like making this GPG key, store it somewhere. Is this part of the process for Speakeasy, or should companies still have some knowledge of Terraform registry and so on?
So I
What's
mean, I guess this is in the support aspect for us, where we what so we do have a number of automations. Actually, if you open up the one of these specs and go into settings on the top right, um, there should be a little checkbox near Terraform for publishing. I can't see it. Might be something to do with licenses, but there is some automation that we've built for publishing. But right now, you still have to make a GPG key and do it yourself. And all this publish button is it kind of just allows you to put these in here, and we'll set up some GitHub actions for you. Most of like as part of the support aspect to how Speakeasy works, we pretty much can set this up entirely for our users and guide them through it, because often they don't want to give us their GPG keys. They would much rather have it generated on a developer machine themselves and then just push it as a GitHub action secret. And so we pretty much just walk through what that process is, which usually adding a go releaser file and configuring a GitHub action. There's no real difference between us and anything else on this kind of provider journey. This is the Terraform plugin framework. There's a very standard thing that HashiCorp maintains for how this works. And we have a slight wrapper to make it a little easier, but users can very easily just copy those files from, let's say, HashiCups, and then just paste them into their GitHub. And then whenever a tag is pushed, it's going to automatically create and release it.
Yeah, right. In terms of publishing to Terraform registry, it can be as simple as publishing to NPM, where you specify things and then you click publish to NPM. Same can be published to Terraform registry here. I mean, there are few things which can be probably it's actually value-added service to Speakeasy. Because if you say that, hey guys, give me just your YAML file, and then, oh, by the way, now learn what is GPG, you've lost me after you said GPG. So yeah, it's just a small thing, but can be useful.
I think
Okay.
you're exactly right. I think we do have a ticket for it, but
Yeah.
we probably should put more effort in.
Actually, talking about tickets and roadmaps, as I understand, you guys are doing this in public, right? Is this your main project, or do you still develop quite a lot not in the public?
So I guess internally we actually use Linear, and then we
Mm.
use a product called like Linear Sync.
Yeah.
And so the view on our public roadmap is all the things that you know we have tagged as public in our
Mm.
internal view. So we do have kind of a bit wider of a roadmap internally, and this is meant to be our kind of exposure of a
Yeah.
subset of our roadmap. And pretty much anything users want to talk about or want to upvote is in here, but we'll have. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think people really would want to see all our internal tickets. There are just like hundreds of random things that a developer has raised. Everyone's worked on very large Jira boards or very large
Mhm.
other Kanban boards, and the idea for this is the things that we have committed to, and that we can curate and keep a lot more simple than our
Yeah.
overcomplicated mess. We like to keep our mess hidden.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's perfect. The reason why I ask is that when companies are developing in public and showing their project on GitHub and everything is visible, it's much easier for people to understand that if I suggest something or if I found a bug, I can see that you guys take it actually seriously. As I think this was, yeah, well, I guess this is related to the bug which we discussed earlier, I think. But anyway, I'm saying that if there is some work happening and I can see that you guys take it seriously and I can follow up, it's much more trustworthy than, oh yeah, your call is important to us and we will never come back to you after. So that's a good job for you here. Okay, well, I'm out of questions, and as I can see, there are no new questions from people. Uh, do you want to say famous last words about anything?
Oh God, you put me on the spot. I haven't thought of last words. Um, so I guess thanks to everyone for coming along or for listening. If you're listening offline, um, we're hiring is one of the last words.
Yeah.
Trying to find a couple more founding engineers, and uh, we are a small team with engineers on support, as you can see in this GitHub issue. And so we try and be very nice and friendly and very easy to use for pretty much anyone. So if anyone would like to use this and it feels a bit scary, we have a public Slack that we very much invite people to join and ask questions on. Um, and
Mm.
yeah, we really much love to work with people who find this interesting.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool. I'm pretty sure that you will have more people interested in at least Terraform Provider Generation because, well, there is no big competition out there. And I've been asked for several years, at least once a month, by different companies who say like, "Hey, we see that you write Terraform. Can you write Terraform Provider?" And the answer is, "Well, I write modules, but I don't write Terraform Providers." And now people can say like, "Oh yeah, we have Terraform Provider." So it should be a good timing. Okay, thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you everyone for joining. I think you will learn something. If you want, go to speakeasy.dev and see you next time. Bye.